I'm completing my 20th year in office and my 8th year as a member of Congress. But what I want to focus on here is this particular last 2 years. This is a time politically in the public policy arena that has become intensely vitriolic, divisive, more so than I have ever seen before. And I've spent 12 of the 20 years I've been in office in the minority. So I have quite a bit of experience in the minority and have always understood that in order to get things done, you know, and even though I am from a staunchly Democratic district and the districts I've represented have always been very Democratic, you know, in spite of that, you know, you can't engage in my way or the highway politics. We're never going to get anything done if we all dig in and insist that the policy decisions that we make have to be done our way. And so, especially because I've been in the minority for 12 of the 20 years I've been in office, I've always prided myself on reaching across the aisle, on developing really good relationships in the state legislature, both the House and Senate, and in the Congress, and have been able to be successful in passing legislation and working with my colleagues across the aisle, whether I was in the majority or the minority. And this term, actually, I've been particularly successful. Just before we adjourned for the August recess, I passed 2 pieces of legislation with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Lamar Smith, who I have worked very closely with. I spent 5 of the 8 years on judiciary and worked with Chairman Smith, who is a staunchly conservative Republican from San Antonio. Doesn't get much more conservative than Lamar Smith, but, and I actually last October brought Chairman Smith down to South Florida and invited him down for a day, and we spent the whole day talking about, he participated in a workshop with me on child protection issues, and then we also went to the Miami, the Miami Hit Studios. I'm forgetting the name of the studio, but we were both involved in patent reform and intellectual property issues, and so we sat down in Miami with the music industry to talk about the challenges that they face with intellectual property, and so he and I have worked closely on a variety of issues, and right before the recess, we passed 2 pieces of legislation together. I was the lead sponsor on the taxpayer identity theft legislation that cracks down on what has become, and we noticed this from a huge spike in my constituent casework that has come into my office, of individuals who have had their tax returns stolen. When they submit their tax return electronically, it kicks back to them. They keep trying to submit it, and then they learn that someone else has filed it, collected their refund, and then the process that they have to go through to get their refund that is owed to them not only takes a absolutely unacceptable length of time, but also think about the economic impact. I mean, most people budget in their lives for, I know that we do, you know, they budget in their lives for that refund to be coming in. So we've helped in my district office people sort through that stuff. But what we found, and I convened a workshop of experts, folks involved, you know, through the IRS and law enforcement and all the taxpayer advocates, to sort through, like, what is the problem here? What are the most significant challenges to really starting to constrict this problem? I mean, it's $5.8 billion that has been stolen. $5.8 billion.
Nationally.
Yes, it's unbelievable.
Annually?
Yes, it's an explosion, So one of the biggest challenges was that, you know, we have the worst identity theft problem in the country here in South Florida, and taxpayer identity theft is the biggest problem. You know, it's sort of the theft du jour, because what we learned from law enforcement was that the penalties just weren't significant enough. And so what happens with identity theft is that they sort of go through the flavor of the month on what is lucrative and that they can do quickly and make a lot of money fast, and then when it gets too tough and they're more likely to get caught and the penalties are too high, they move on to the next type of fraud. The penalties were clearly too low. So Chairman Smith and I I introduced with him the Stop It Act, the Stop Taxpayer, well, I can't remember the acronym, but it's legislation to, we're all about acronyms in Washington. The acronym's not important, the substance is important. The legislation that we introduced increases the penalties for taxpayer identity theft. We have identity theft as a crime already, but it makes it an aggravated crime, so that it makes it a minimum, a 2-year mandatory minimum if you get caught stealing a taxpayer's identity and collecting their refund. And then it also has a specific provision that for the first time says that stealing a business or a charitable organization's identity is illegal and comes with a penalty as well. Because you know those phishing schemes that happen where you'll get an email that looks like it's from your bank, and they tell you, oh, well, we need your account information, and you're warned not to ever give your personal information in an email like that because your bank's never going to ask you for it. It's actually not criminal to steal another organization's identity or a business's identity. This bill would make it criminal. And it requires some coordination, and also the Department of Justice to report to us on the progress that they're making on cracking down on this kind of crime. The other bill that we passed out of the House, and we're going to work when we get back to pass both of them out of the Senate, is the Child Protection Act, which is legislation that follows up on the Protect Our Children Act that I passed into law in 2007 with then Senator, now Vice President Biden, that continues to go after child sexual predators, particularly child pornographers. Increases the penalties for child pornography, for possession of pornography, makes sure that we reauthorize the $60 million annually that the Protect Our Children Act authorized for the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces, because we know that in 30% of the cases, when the ICAC task forces have those resources, if they're able to investigate those crimes, they actually rescue a victim and they arrest the criminal. And there's 500,000. At least 500,000 known computers, known individuals who are transmitting this pornography, the child pornography, which is a misnomer because it's really crime scene photos, online. And so it's a horrific problem. And you know, being a mom of young kids, you know, especially my 13-year-olds, making young people especially aware of, self-aware of interacting, who they should interact with online, is important. But I just wanted to give you 2 concrete examples of how I've been able to work in a very divisive environment across the aisle, and also, you know, in spite of the fact that I happen to be the chair of the Democratic National Committee. So you know, that seemingly would be an added challenge, but it has not been. I've been able to maintain my really strong relationships. And then lastly, I'll share with you that I actually passed a bill into law earlier this year earlier this Congress when we passed the patent reform legislation that I introduced that continues my advocacy as both a breast cancer survivor and as someone who really wants to continue to expand access to quality health care. One of the things that I learned when I was going through breast cancer myself and was diagnosed with breast cancer and then subsequently was diagnosed with the breast cancer gene, when I asked for a second opinion after I got that test back, I was told that a second opinion wasn't possible because there's only one test, because the test and the gene are patented. Now imagine having to make life-altering decisions like that I had to make. I had a double mastectomy and my ovaries removed based on the results of one test, and one that couldn't be repeated or independently verified. So while we were going through patent reform, tried hard to allow at least for there to be second opinion testing, so that even if you're not going to set aside the patent, because that's being litigated and it's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, then at least you would have an opportunity to get a second opinion and have independent tests available for that purpose. So first you'd have to get the test from the patented company, The second opinion, though, would be authorized and could be independent. So I was able to, again, work with Chairman Smith, and I got the bill amended into the patent reform legislation. It passed into law, and the Patent Trade Office is doing a study to basically recommend how second opinion testing would work, so that you could make sure that you were balancing the needs of the patent holder, because you don't want to stifle research. You don't want to make it so that the investments that are significant that these companies make into research that finds cures and finds innovations, you don't want to stifle that. At the same time, you don't want to put someone like me in a situation.
So you get a second opinion based on a different test?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, an independent test. So just to give you an example, with the BRCA testing, the breast cancer gene testing, Myriad is the company that has both the gene patent and the testing patent, and no other company can do the test because they own the gene and the tests. this legislation, once the study is done, and we're going to base legislation off the results of the study, will allow other companies to develop a test and be able to make it available for a second opinion. So when I said, after I got my results back from Myriad, who had the patent, I asked, well, how spot on is this? Is it definitely that I have it? Because, I was diagnosed early. And so the original recommendation for my treatment was a lumpectomy and radiation and nothing else. And I ended up having a double mastectomy because once I had the breast cancer gene, my likelihood of recurrence was so significant that and also of getting ovarian cancer before I was 50. So, and unfortunately I was at the stage of life where I could, I had all the, Steve and I had all the children we planned to have, and we were past that point, but so many people aren't. And so giving them a chance to at least have the comfort that the test was repeated independently of the first company's test, and that have the confirmation so that you can make a more informed healthcare decision.
So let's get into, and then
Yeah,
this
so
is
thank
good
you.
because that was that was one question that Nancy had about the difficulty of working across the aisle.
Oh,
So you seem
okay.
to have answered it.
Yeah, oh good.
So when you look at your district, has anything changed in the past since you were here 2 years ago as far as what's the most pressing issue and how can it be tackled,
Well, jobs in the economy continue to be the most pressing issue. It was when I was here 2 years ago. It still is. The only difference is that we're starting to see some progress. There's been a thawing of the challenges that people have faced. Our unemployment rate has dropped. We actually in Florida now have the second lowest number of new applications for unemployment benefits in the country, and we had the second biggest drop, I believe the second biggest drop in our unemployment rate nationally. But we still have an unemployment rate that's above the national average. It's still too high, and we still have housing challenges. That's particularly important. We have made progress, and quite honestly, we've only made progress on housing because President Obama has had dogged persistence on ensuring that there are a variety of programs that continue to be available for people to take advantage of, to be able to work out mortgages, or to be able to take advantage of low interest rates, or to make sure through the neighborhood stabilization program that with the neighborhoods that we have in South Florida that are dotted with foreclosures and short sales, that they aren't in a situation where everyone's property values are being brought down because of that. So there's a program that allows local governments to buy those properties and refurbish them and then sell them so that we can address that problem. But so President Obama, when we started the president's term, which was almost 4 years ago, we were about to go over a cliff. So if we go 2 times ago when I was here, we were facing a very dire situation. The economy was crashing. We were hemorrhaging 750,000 jobs a month. We really had to do something. I supported the TARP program. I supported the Recovery Act that the president pushed through the Congress after he took office, because with the hemorrhaging of 750,000 jobs a month, the economy, we needed a tourniquet. You had to stop the bleeding. And investing that $787 billion was incredibly important to save jobs, teachers, firefighters, police officers, the first responders' jobs, to plug some of the budget holes. The state of Florida would not have been able to survive those 2 legislative sessions without that Recovery Act. To invest in infrastructure, in green energy jobs, in education. There are the Race to the Top funds were in there. So there was huge, game-changing items in the Recovery Act that helped us stop the bleeding. And then we were able to rescue the American automobile industry, which, by the way, in Florida, and people may not realize, in 2010, that saved 35,000 jobs in Florida. Because we had 35,000 jobs in Florida saved through the rescue of the auto industry. And then we have added 7,000 more jobs in the auto industry since that time. So, and I remember at the time that things were crashing, we had auto dealers who were facing closure from GM, and we were dealing with a lot of constituents. There was GM had a process that they were going through, remember, that was deciding who was able to remain open and who wasn't, and we were going to bat. I remember making calls up to GM government officials, government affairs officials, and others to try to help our dealerships. And then when the automobile industry was saved and that loan was provided by the federal government, many of those dealerships were able to remain open. And then you also had the Cash for Clunkers program, which helped a lot because a lot of people were able to go out and buy vehicles. And you had the first-time home buyers tax credit that was made available.
Right.
So those things have helped, but we still have a long way to go.
But even some members of your caucus, for example, on mortgages, like Congresswoman Lofgren, was quoted this weekend as saying, but these initiatives were too timid. They didn't do enough.
I agree.
They haven't worked.
Oh, absolutely. No, I wouldn't say they hadn't worked. They hadn't worked well enough. But the choice that we were faced with was, okay, I agree that they were too timid. I remember at the time in that Congress, which was the 111th Congress when we passed them, I voted for versions of those programs that would have gone much further. I think that we should have had stronger language in the statute that directed the banks to work with homeowners who were upside down and who were facing foreclosure, that they put some more teeth behind it and say, no, this is not an option for you. You have to work with this homeowner. Now, we're not going to tell you how to do it, but you can't just blow them off. And so I agree that they were not strong enough. But what the Republicans did when they came into the 112th Congress is among their top priorities were to just repeal all the programs and do nothing. And then, not to get into the presidential campaign side too much, but you have their party standard bearer who made it very clear what he thought the solution was. Let's just let the private market take care of this. Let investors come in and buy up the properties and hopefully sell them off for a profit, and that'll take care of itself. Well, that just really shows how they have absolutely no concept of the depth of this problem, and that the private market, not only is it not going to just take care of itself, but we also have to think about the long-term impact of having it take as long as leaving it completely to the private market would take. We're talking about families. There are families that aren't able to remain in their homes if they're not able to pay their mortgage. Or we've got families who can pay their mortgage, but at some point it becomes absolutely pointless when they are so upside down that that it doesn't make sense for them to continue to do it.
What should have been done to help small business? One of the things is, as you mentioned, the teachers, the firefighters, police,
Right.
and that's all true. Florida would have had. But one complaint that we saw early on from a lot of our readers and letters to the editor, and I think people on the street just felt like, okay, we've handled some of these folks who are basic constituencies of the Democratic Party because they're union members in a lot of states. But beyond that, the small business people seem to be, it almost seemed to morph into, some of those folks kind of went into that new movement that sprung up for the Tea Party. They'll say, I'm a small business owner and nothing was done for me. Beyond the politics of it, what could have been done or what should be done moving forward?
Well, let me tell you what was done, because that's probably the single biggest misunderstanding, misperception, lack of awareness about what has been done for small business owners. And, quite honestly, I think that a lot more could have been done to make small business owners aware of what was available to them to help get there. There are too many small business owners that don't realize that we pushed through 18 different tax breaks for small business owners that are law right now. That when the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, when it became law, right then and since then, a 35% tax credit was available for small businesses that weren't currently providing, that provide health insurance to their employees, and give them an opportunity to take that tax credit to provide it. And then it goes up to 50% in 2014. So there were 18 different tax breaks designed to assist small businesses to be able to make investments in capital, to be able to make sure that they could hire, to be able to make sure that they took advantage of payroll tax cut extensions. So actually, we did quite a lot for small businesses, and that's in part, I think, why we have actually seen a resurgence for many of these businesses. But I think you could always do more. Our focus from the Democratic perspective is what we shouldn't be doing is what Paul Ryan, I'm on the budget committee and he's the chairman, and so I've kind of had a front row seat for this. Their proposal is we should only cut the education and healthcare and discretionary programs. We should slash those. We shouldn't generate any revenue at all. And besides that, we should end Medicare as we know it and turn it into a voucher program. And then on top of that, let's add some more tax breaks, $5 trillion of tax breaks skewed to the wealthiest Americans, paid for by the middle class, who would see about a $2,000 on average for a family with children increase in their taxes every year. That's what we should not be doing. What we should be doing, and we need to work together on this. It is so frustrating to me that we have solvable problems. Yeah. We really do. We just have to sit down around a table like this with Republicans and Democrats coming together, putting aside our, either side's extreme ideologies, and agree that we're going to hammer out some compromise. But the problem has been that there's only one side that is willing to do that, because the Republicans have made it very clear they care about one job. They don't care about creating jobs. They care about one job, Barack Obama's. And they don't want to do anything that will help make him successful. Let's go back to last July when we passed that debt ceiling deal. The debt ceiling deal, which ultimately had a cuts-only approach to deficit reduction. It was $1.5 trillion in cuts, and that was the compromise we reached with the Republicans to increase the debt ceiling, and then it created the super committee, remember, which was supposed to get together and hopefully come up with something like $4 trillion in deficit reduction. Democrats thought there should be a balanced approach of cuts and revenue, and the Republicans refused to do anything but cuts, and so it fell apart. And then they agreed to this. So then the sequestration component of that deal kicked in, which we're going to have to deal with later on. That debt ceiling deal had $1.5 trillion in cuts. I voted for it. It included cuts that I have spent my career opposing. But I voted for it because I know we can't be my way or the highway about this. It's my responsibility to come back here to South Florida to explain to many of my very liberal constituents, why I voted for cuts that they oppose. And I was, I did so because I know we're going to have to. No, we shouldn't be cutting things like education and innovation and investments in higher education and access to Pell Grants. That's what the Ryan budget does. So we've got to strike a balance.
Did the president miss a bet by not endorsing or embracing, really, bold Simpson?
No, he didn't. He didn't. Paul Ryan didn't even vote for the Simpson Bowles, and he was on the commission. No, because look, the only way that we're going to they have some interesting ideas in Simpson Bowles. If we're able to sit down around the table together and work together across party lines, then there's probably quite a bit of what they've recommended that we could implement. But you got to go back to 1982 when Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan made that grand bargain that added longevity to Social Security. The only way it happened is if the two parties sat down together and both sides had skin in the game. That is how we're going to solve this problem. Until we have, a willing party to sit down with, then solving our really big challenges and getting people to actually take some risk, which is what this is. Both sides are going to have to be willing to take votes that are risky for them. So you kind of have to jump off the cliff together. When you have a party that says, whose leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, says that his #1 priority for the Congress is defeating Barack Obama, when you have a presidential standard bearer like Mitt Romney, who the night he won the Florida primary said, you have to remember what this election is really about, to his supporters. And I thought it was going to be the next line, creating jobs, getting the economy turned around, protecting our national security interests. Then he's repeated, you have to remember what this election is really about, defeating Barack Obama. That's the beginning and the end for them.
You talked about having to sit down and take risks, both sides having to have some skin in the game. Mm-hmm. We've taken like a half step in creating the dream, getting the DREAM Act on board. Right. I just came from an event, a DREAM Act event, actually. But what's the end point? Why is this taking so long?
Oh, it's very simple, because we have Republicans that refuse to actually support and embrace the notion that if you are a young person, well, they don't embrace comprehensive immigration reform at all. and you have a presidential candidate in Mitt Romney who actually has the most extreme policy on immigration of any presidential candidate in modern times. But very simply because we passed the DREAM Act out of the House. And then they couldn't get enough Republican support because they keep insisting that everything passed with 60 votes, which is not how the Founding Fathers envisioned laws passing. And so the DREAM Act failed by something like 5 or 6 votes. So this is an achievable goal with just a few Republicans who need to go see the wizard for some courage.
But the people who, and we really need to get on.
Yeah, we have the next one.
Okay.
No, but we have to get on to, I think, foreign affairs. I mean,
sure.
Israel.
Yeah.
The president has not visited Israel, and there's a serious question apparently in this country over among Jewish groups.
No, there's a serious question by Republicans who simply want to do everything they can to, they know they can't get support in the Jewish community on their domestic agenda because their domestic agenda is anathema to everything that the Jewish community stands for. So what they have to do is they have to lie and distort and mischaracterize the president's...
Do you have any differences with the president on his policy on Israel?
No, I don't. I think the president has a stellar record on Israel. I'm proud to, in fact, I'm the first Jewish woman to represent Florida in Congress, and I bring my love of Israel to work with me every day. And I made Tikkun Olam, the repairing the world, a career choice. And so I'm proud to stand with this president, as has the Israeli leadership, like Ehud Barak, who just recently, a few weeks ago, in a CNN interview said that in his lifetime, he can't remember a president who was more supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship than Barack Obama, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Perez, and even Avigdor Lieberman and Danny Ayalon, who are on the extreme right in Israel. Look, as far as the traveling to Israel, President Obama went to Israel in October of 2008, as a candidate. There are only 2 presidents that have been to Israel in their first term, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. To hold President Obama to a different standard than virtually every president, Ronald Reagan never went to Israel. And so this is nothing more than Republicans who are putting their love of party in front of their love of Israel and trying to shave off a little bit of support in the Jewish community that they know is going to vote for Democrats.
But they seem to have gotten a lot of mileage out of the idea.
No, they haven't gotten
too timid on Iran.
They haven't gotten as much as you think. They want to let people believe that they have gotten a lot of mileage. But President Obama, in September of last year, stood in front of the entire world at the United Nations, threw the gauntlet down, made it very clear when everyone had expected the Palestinians to unilaterally declare a Palestinian state. Diplomatically, President Obama stepped up to the plate, put the full strength of his diplomatic corps behind the notion that that would be unacceptable, that we would veto it in the Security Council, and then he gave a speech that was very strong and said to the entire world, the only path to peace and a 2-state solution for the Palestinians is through direct bilateral negotiations, and that Israel has the right to defend itself by itself, and that Israel has every right to expect that they could remain a Jewish and democratic state in that ultimate, whenever the parties get back to those talks. And time and again, in 3 a.m. emergencies like the Carmel forest fire, or the 6 Israelis that were barricaded in the Israeli embassy in Egypt, or when President Obama has informed by his trip to Israel. Now let's look at the difference in the 2 trips to Israel as candidates. Candidate Obama, when he went to Israel in October of 2008, went to southern Israel, to Sderot, which was the city that was suffering the most from the rocket attacks. And informed by that visit, when he became president of the United States, in spite of the fact that the previous president rejected the funding, supported and pushed through $205 million in funding for the Iron Dome missile defense system, because he saw firsthand what happened to those Israelis suffering from those rocket attacks, and then subsequently has supported and pushed through the Congress more funding to deploy those missile batteries around the perimeter of Israel so that they can add further protection. in the face of a difficult and challenging economy, supported more than $3 billion, the most foreign aid funding that we've ever provided to Israel, more than $3 billion consistently in foreign aid to Israel. Made sure that at the UN, diplomatically, that we have stood with them time and again to discredit the Goldstone report, to help make sure that after the Gaza flotilla, that the language that originally came out on that resolution, which was so problematic for Israel, was renegotiated so that it would be embraced by all the parties. And then with Iran,
more time. But there seems to be a lot of daylight between Israel's position on Iran and the president's
no,
position.
absolutely not. In fact, we have never had closer, I mean, you can speak to, as I have, and that have spoken publicly. I mean, Ehud Barak in that same interview said, we have never had closer military and intelligence cooperation between our two countries than ever before. I mean, so you really, every single day, our military and intelligence leaders in Israel and the United States are working together side by side. And so, you know, where there might be differences, those differences are among colleagues who are working, sitting at the table together every single day and coordinating and are very aware. This is not like you have, you know, one group of leaders on one side in one country, another group of leaders on another country who occasionally talk to each other and are sniping at each other in disagreement. These are colleagues sitting at the table in Israel and then traveling back and forth to the United States, working together to ensure that Iran never can achieve its nuclear ambition, and that all options are on the table, all meaning all, but that obviously, you know, any commander-in-chief, and certainly Prime Minister Netanyahu, I expect, would agree, is that war should be the last option. So we will continue to negotiate with, to communicate with our strongest ally, Israel, on what the right approach is to continue every option available to us, including President Obama pushing through the most biting, significant sanctions internationally ever pushed through, and then following that up with the European Union. I mean, even bringing Russia and China to the table. I mean, normally Russia and China would veto those types of resolutions at the Security Council, but instead they supported them. And then the most biting economic sanctions from the U.S. and then from the EU. And then engaging diplomatically, which, you know, obviously you have to try, but those Iran is probably, you know, a little disingenuous in their participation in that. But you know, I'm confident, and the Jews in the United States, although we have trepidation, obviously, over Iran's nuclear ambition, I think the community is very proud of President Obama's efforts. And it's incredibly disappointing to see the efforts of some Republican Jewish supporters who are putting who are really jeopardizing Israel's interests. Because if you create a perception that there is any daylight between Israel and the United States, that endangers Israel with her Arab neighbors and her enemies. Because there is not any daylight in the United States. And you don't want there to be any perception worldwide that Israel has anything less than bipartisan, solid support from the United States, which she absolutely does and will continue to have.